Alrighty, so we got new details about the terror attack in Moscow. Putin himself came out and talked about this a bit. I guess the headline is there's still nothing really concrete about this. There's a consensus across the West and Russia. Everyone agrees on this. The perpetrators were Islamic terrorists of some kind. The U.S. has been very specific and said that this is the Afghan branch of ISIS, known as ISIS-K, which is a kind of a. If you actually think about what the acronym means, American intelligence agencies love acronyms. They love ISIS, and then what they did was they took this group that was affiliated with ISIS, okay, but it based in Afghanistan, and just added an extra letter for the province of Afghanistan in which they're based. So ISIS-K stands for the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria - Khorasan, which is in neither Iraq or Syria. It's in Afghanistan. So it's not a very good term. It's actually like an affront to the English language. But this is the name that the U.S. intelligence has decided to call these people. And I had to look this up. I assumed, silly me, that this was the same as the Khorasan group, which is a little-known terrorist cell that may or may not have ever existed. Even the Wikipedia page says this, and you know how pro-regime Wikipedia is. Wikipedia will delete anything that is written on there by a dissident. Even Wikipedia says it's not clear if the Khorasan group ever existed or if it was just a propaganda term that was dreamed up by U.S. intelligence in order to promote the war in Syria. But anyway, that Khorasan group, apparently, I was trying to figure out, is it because they were from Afghanistan? I couldn't find anything about that. These just seem to be Al-Qaeda in Syria, which, again, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, they really all blend together. There's not much of a distinction there except for who they answer to in terms of like the hierarchy of their leadership. They don't coordinate directly. And so the Khorasan group, to the extent that it ever existed, seemed to be integrated into the command structure led by Ayman al-Zawahiri, whereas so-called ISIS-K, the other Khorasan group, which is actually in Khorasan, unlike the term, the people, I want to get into that a little bit. Does anyone remember the absolute hysteria around the Khorasan group back in like 2014? I remember seeing Fox News all of a sudden. They talked about it endlessly. A light switch was flipped, and that's why it was an obvious intel op. Because this thing you'd never heard of, all of a sudden the news told us this is the worst thing ever. Just like when they kept saying, oh my gosh, the Kurds. We have to rescue the Kurds. That was one of the later pushes to get the U.S. involved in Syria. They said the Kurds are going to all be killed right now in the next 5 days if we don't get there. And before that, I think there were the Yazidis on Mount Sinjar in Iraq, if I remember correctly. But the news comes up with these immediate crises. They say there's something, a tree fell in the forest in Africa. We have to go there right away. This is completely urgent. Everyone in America, we need to stop everything we're doing and pay attention to this. But pay attention to it just for the next couple of weeks so that we have an excuse to invade and send more troops to this country. Don't look at it long enough to where you can actually figure out what's going on, because then you'll realize everything we're saying is bullshit. That's how it always is. These people want you very, very invested in what's going on in the rest of the world, but they want you completely uninformed, because that's the only way that they can get their way. You will be made to care about Ukraine. You will be made to care about ISIS-K, even though we're no longer in Afghanistan. The people of Moscow certainly were made to care about ISIS-K. The question is, by who? Was this a well-planned out and executed terror attack by a bunch of goat herders? living in the hills of Afghanistan who managed to travel all the way to Moscow, and apparently they hired mercenaries to carry out this attack for them. Or at least that's what the first guy who was getting captured by the Russians, that's what he said. He said, well, I was hired on Telegram for $11,000. And I think a lot of people were doubting that story, saying, like, oh, you were just hired 5 days ago? You were just some random guy? It's like, no, this seems like you did a lot of training. Although now the U.S. and Russia both saying these were Islamists. Russia has now said specifically what group, though. They also, the Russians are leaving open, as you might imagine. I mean, whether this was true or not, I mean, you would kind of expect the Russians maybe to throw this possibility out there, that this was coordinated and assisted by Ukraine. Because, it might be a little hard to believe that tiny little Afghan ISIS, when ISIS is a non-entity, completely no, they're nothing. They're irrelevant. That is how you describe ISIS. That they could carry out an attack of the... Now, then again, you say, well, Al-Qaeda, we're led to believe, carried out 9/11 all by themselves, with no assistance. That's the official story. Actually, that's not even the official story anymore. I think everyone acknowledges that Saudi Arabia was helping them, at the very least. There could be other U.S. allies who were helping them, but we're not going to talk about those people. But at the very least, people understand. I mean, not too far from where I am speaking, I could get in the car and drive there right now. There once lived a Saudi so-called diplomat in a house here who hosted Muhammad Atta and one other hijacker, I believe. He lived with them. And I believe he was not the only Saudi directly implicated with direct dealings with the very fine people who blew up the World Trade Center. And so, in that case, yes, Al-Qaeda was a small, scrappy group of ideologically motivated men, very strongly motivated men. But they still needed state help. They needed assistance in order to bring their dreams to fruition. And so it's not unreasonable to believe that after this... Now, this was no 9/11. I'm not going to be like Israel and say that, oh my gosh, October 7th was worse than 9/11, and say this about the Ruskies. I hope the Ruskies are also not trying to say this is worse than 9/11, because from everything I've seen, it's clearly not. I think the death toll was in the hundreds, which is a lot. But obviously it's not 9/11. It's not that big of a scale of an attack, and so, it's not as unbelievable that a group could have done this on their own. So we'll have to wait. I mean, it's not like any of us really have much ability to suss out the truth here, one way or the other. We just kind of have to look at what everyone says, and based on the facts that we are given, which that we don't even have that control over that, we're going to have to come to our own conclusions. So the Ruskies are strongly making it clear that they suspect that Ukraine had something to do with this. Well, I'm not going to pass judgment on the Ukrainians over this specific incident unless the Ruskies want to bring some convincing evidence to the table. I think that's only fair. I think that when you're engaged in a brutal war with another country, and something like this happens in your capital, it's pretty fair to suspect the country you're at war with. After all, the Bolshevik Revolution was a German plot. The Kaiser is the one who unleashed Lenin back into Russia, where he slaughtered the Tsar and his family. Not just the men, but the women and the children too. That wasn't random. That wasn't organic. That was state action. That was an act of terrorism, funded and advanced, ordered by a foreign enemy state. And I didn't even make the connection. That was Russia and this is Russia. Obviously, in Russia, they'd be much more familiar with that story. And so the idea, given that already in World War I, the Germans inflicted the Bolshevik Revolution upon the people of Russia, which led to 70 years of communism. I'm sure they're very much aware of the possibility that this is part of some broader Western strategy to take them down. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here in the next one.